The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erika Barudis.
Welcome back to The Discourse. We are continuing to talk about the story that keeps going.
It does. It never ends. And before we dive into it today, I think it's worth recapping all the latest developments because there have been a lot of developments in the last week. And maybe we can kind of go through them one by one and talk about what they mean and what the implications are. But to start with, I got a few notes last week, people saying, like, why are you calling this the AHS scandal? AHS is not being accused of some kind of a scandal here. It's the government that's being accused of the scandal. So I think that's a really good point, especially since this week we've seen that this issue goes well beyond healthcare now. And there's stories popping up in other ministries. So the NDP is calling it corrupt care. Maybe that sticks.
Do you like it?
You know, I just, like, for the public, like, if you're just like a regular, like, person on the street and then someone says, like, have you heard the corrupt care scandal? Like, that, I just don't think that's how regular people talk. It's got lovely alliteration. It's nice and short. I think it's more accurate than the AHS scandal, but maybe there's a better idea. So I asked ChatGPT to come up with some names. And here's some that it came up with. Like, I'm not sure if any of these are awesome, but it's fun to talk about. So ProcureGate, because, you know, every great scandal should end in a gate. ContractGate, also not sure that that's how people on the street talk. UCP.
That's clever.
Very clever, using that P at the end. FixBid, actually, you know, kind of sounds like a bidding system.
Yeah. Or like a
List.
Bitcoin. Like I'm like, so get a wallet for it.
Grift list, like this honestly sounds like something that like belongs on a right-wing YouTube channel. So maybe Tender Trap. I like this one. UC Pork Barrel Politics. That one's kind of fun.
I feel like that's like inside baseball, but I always like when you use like NDP or UCP and you can make it
use
clever.
That last letter.
Yeah.
The P does not stand for party anymore.
Yeah.
Contract coup. I don't know. You want to read the next couple because I know these are the only two on the list you liked. Yeah.
Okay. Pay to Pal, like PayPal, feel it's funny. And then Privy Purse might actually be. Again, you have to know the reference, but this could catch on about the historical reference for personal spending of public funds.
And I also like Privy Purse, but if we're talking about things that people on the street do not talk and don't
like,
remember.
Privy, what's that?
Privy
like,
Purse,
you're like,
that one's out. But like internally,
it's running for the
call
Senate and having to explain to people that we have a Senate. And I'm sure Privy would have more explaining, but I like it's like catchy.
Yeah. And then the last one on the list, just to keep using that P, you see Piggy Bank, just treating the public dollars like their own personal spending accounts. We'll see. Maybe as this evolves, one of these will make more sense. But for now, I think we have to stick like corrupt care, the UCP scandal, probably more accurate.
Yeah.
Okay. Back to the latest in
Okay,
the
just
case.
kidding. I just thought of another one that like I think someone's really trying to make stick. And so Jason Markusoff keeps saying like Watergate Salopolis. And like if the former the CEO of Alberta Health Services name wasn't hard enough, like I just see people referring to her as her title as opposed to Mensalopoulos. Like you're already losing if you have to like have people like do the clap and slow down. Sorry, Jason. I know that you're really trying to make that one catch, but that was another one that's been less. I actually write it down every time I do media. So, but okay, now we can go back. So, go.
No, go ahead. Back to the latest in terms of what happened this week.
Yeah, okay. So we filmed last week, like right after the Premier and the Minister Lagrange held a press conference refuting the allegations, making it very clear that they were personally not involved in any of the allegations. And I think that was probably their goal of the press conference and that they had done nothing wrong and announcing that they would launch an investigation into AHS procurement. And I know that you're probably going to want to talk about that one.
I do just want to touch on it. And I said this last week, but I do think like as this story evolves, the stance the Premier is taking is, you know, it is a really aggressive stance. And like maybe that's what she feels like she has to do when faced with this kind of controversy without having had the opportunity yet to file a statement of defense. But she came out and said, we are going to launch this investigation into AHS procurement and make sure that AHS procurement is above board, when this whole thing is not about AHS procurement. It's about contracts being manipulated by people inside the government for the benefit of either people inside the government or people close to the government. And this investigation that she's launched will not necessarily uncover that. So like what I would have liked to see, and like she said, I knew nothing about it. This is all above board. Nothing untoward has happened here. I would have liked her to have her say, we take these allegations seriously and we are going to look into these allegations rather than like shiny object looked over here. We've always hated AHS.
Yeah, she has been up a few times in the last week. And one of the questions that was asked of her was, what does this look like? And she did clarify that there would be, a clear independent investigation, not calling it a public inquiry. I don't know why, because now they're saying that there will be judicial involvement. And like I said, I think last week, or I've done a lot of media on this, so I don't even know where I said what. My message has been pretty clear and consistent, I hope. Like she can call it we're looking at AHS procurement, but if there is government interference, it will be part of it. I think she doesn't want to say that because it might imply that they are guilty. These are all just allegations. And so by saying we're looking into procurement, that is the root of where some of these allegations are coming from. I think it's fair to frame that, but she has clarified that there will be judicial involvement. I think it will actually reflect very similarly to a public inquiry. And like I said, it's been reported, like anyone that's going to be doing this is going to look at all of those things and turn all those rocks over. And I'm very happy that that's happening. I just want to know the truth.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I hope that's all true and right. And I hope she keeps giving assurances that, all of this will be looked into and not just at a high level AHS procurement. It's interesting because this issue, at least the conversations that I've had over the last week and just listening to you there, often when you have a government in this situation, you have sort of like the teams align politically, wherever your political allegiance is, that's where you sit. But I've heard from a lot of conservatives this week who are not necessarily saying like, I'm ready to defend this. I'm ready to say the government has done no wrong. I want answers. Like, you're not necessarily saying we will defend this at all costs.
No, and I've probably said that. I've had like a lot of mixed feelings. I am very loyal to my leader and especially to my party. Like, this has been a little bit difficult to even have these allegations. Again, nothing is proven, but like there is a great government agenda that I'm proud of that they're putting forward. And this is a huge distraction from any of that. Like, we have a budget today and it's like not even being talked about or speculated because it's put it to a back burner because of this quote unquote scandal. So it's hard to defend because I don't know what the truth is. And again, there's only been allegations out. There's not a statement of defense that can maybe reassure. I think that's probably the same case with caucus and cabinet, and everyone just wants to know answers. So it's like, for me, I just want to know the truth. And if there are heads to be put on platters, absolutely put them on them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's good. I think that it's, especially when you have pressure internally, as we know the premier currently does, it's one thing to have the opposition calling for it. It's another thing to have people around your own cabinet table, maybe not anymore, people around your own cabinet table calling for a more transparent and thorough investigation. That's probably a good segue into the latest in this saga this week. We know, last week when we started this, Pete Guthrie had a memo leaked saying that he would like to see more transparency and he would like to have the health minister removed. He would like to have the top bureaucrat removed from his role in both AHS and Alberta Health. But a lot has happened since then.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is like, it feels like every other day there's a news story coming out. And as of last week, like the memo had been leaked from Infrastructure Minister Pete Guthrie. You've kind of highlighted some of the things that he had called for. And then like first of this week, right as we're going back into session, we see that he has posted a letter from his legislative assembly. So as the MLA, that he has given the premier a letter resigning from cabinet, that he has decided that for whatever ethical reasons, and he's listed some in his memo, but then just said, I can no longer serve. I'm looking for transparency. That is huge. Like, I can't think of a time where that has happened and it hasn't. There's other percolation now. It's like, does he stay in caucus? What happens with the rapport within the room? You have a minister leave. Well, that's a trickle down effect from staff and like your confidence in your role and what's happening and who's saying what and what is the truth. I think that it's now starting to, I don't think it's as far in the public as, we see every day. I think that there's lots of people that just see it as there's this story about government. There's this story about AHS. I don't know if I care or not. And it's now like other ministries that it's actually kind of hard to follow for the average person to know if they they care, or they're just like, is this normal? Is it not? But for a cabinet minister to leave, I think that will make a lot more people look at it. But it also has severe, as you know, like big impacts within caucus cabinet and the staffing dynamic at the legislature as well. Well, you're going back to probably the most stressful time, which is budget season.
Yeah. And just to offer a little more into what he said, part of his statement says it is essential that the public has confidence in its government and its processes. And we were elected to be open, transparent, fiscally responsible, and above all, honest with Albertans. So basically stepping aside because he says that his cabinet colleagues do not have that same level of, or are not calling for that same level of transparency and accountability that he is. And you're right. Like when the public hears, oh, a cabinet minister resigned, like that is Danielle Smith's inner circle saying that person does not have confidence in her. And that is a really big deal. And I think, last week we talked about his memo being leaked saying this guy's willing to sacrifice his cabinet position for this issue. Now we see he really is. He's willing to step away from cabinet because he's worried about what's going on here and feels that the government has not taken enough steps to clear their name or investigate or find out what's going on here. And I think that is really big for the public.
Yeah. The interesting part, though, is like he still doesn't, they're all allegations, right? The one issue that he can talk to about his specific ministry was, and this was reported last week by Charles Rusnell, and he was talking about a land sale where a businessman at the center of this procurement scandal bought a property last spring and sold it to the province 3 months later, netting a profit of $300,000. Now, like, one, the minister wouldn't see that. He says that as soon as that happened, he got, an audit and an inquiry. Like, I don't know what he knows. Clearly, there's like ethical challenges that he's navigating. But from his own ministry, like that's to me business as usual, like land being transferred, sold. That's, how the sector works. And so to me, that's not really something, but now it's kind of getting attention because of that minister stepping away and citing that or the story about this happening. But to me, like it's not scandalesque because it's just really operational and at a low level, right? It just so happens it's the same businessman. And I think that's what the issue is.
For sure. And I mean, otherwise, I'm not sure that this would get the attention that it's currently getting. But we're talking about sort of like this net that is now being woven across ministries. And Pete Guthrie's resignation has raised questions about, like, is what we're seeing in the public discourse right now, is it just the tip of the iceberg? Is there a lot more going on that we don't know about? And so, like, maybe this land deal is totally normal. Maybe there's a good reason why there was a net profit of $300,000 over a really short period of time. But it's being raised because the person who owned the company that made this deal is the same person that is part owner of the private surgical company ASG. And that is also the owner of the company that is at the heart of the Tylenol Gate deal, which, if you've forgotten, the government paid $75 million to import child's pain medication, but most of that medication has not arrived, and the portion that did was deemed unsafe for use. This is also the guy, if you're playing along here, who hosted the Premier and her staff in a luxury suite at the Oilers playoff games last year. The Premier had changed the rules to make that allowable, an allowable gift, an allowable expense. But seeing the same company and the same name pop up in multiple places that are raising questions has sort of raised the profile of other pieces going on, like this land deal.
Yeah. And I think if I was a minister, I would be doing my own internal digging. Again, these as silos, I don't actually think are newsworthy per se. I think it's just because it's a collective. And let me tell you, I lived through the Alison Redford. There was a lot of like different pieces that were fine. And then when woven in the media and in stories, and having the, your CEO of HS also bring a lawsuit forward, like, there's a lot of slow drip to this. Like, I mean, the Minister of Public Safety also has been identified as appointing connections to boards again, or to the Police Commission. To me, looking at the individual's resume that was appointed, I'm like, seems like a pretty legit person. Weird that the minister didn't respond. And so this was something that happened in 2023. A surgeon was appointed to the Police Commission in Edmonton. Kind of like not a big deal. There's lots of people that get appointed. Credentials, people, both parties, appoint their friends or like people that they know to be qualified candidates. And so, again, that's kind of a nothing, but I think it's just that it keeps being tied back to specific people. that is
It's
making
interesting,
it
though.
newsworthy.
And it's also because in both these cases, both the police commission and the land deal, there was something like weird about it to start with. Like it's something that like reporters or the public remembered. Like the land deal, $300,000 in a couple of months is a lot of money. Like maybe that would warrant looking at it in the first place. And then it happens to tie back to the other things going on.
Yeah, I don't know how that came out, like how that was found, right? Because I mean, I don't know. I'm not a land developer and I don't own land and sell it. But to me, like, I think you just found a good property and you had to manage the potential revenue. So the price
and we don't know.
Went up, right?
Like that could totally be the case. I was going to say in the story about the police commission, the reason that this one is also flagged is not necessarily its ties to this company, but the fact that this person was appointed by the province to the Edmonton Police Commission, which is already outside of the norm. Usually this is city council's responsibility. And then second, that person was appointed to the police commission on the day the UCP called the election. And then it wasn't announced until the day after the election. So already, like, if I'm a reporter, I'm looking closely at this being like, why? Like, that doesn't really, it doesn't really make sense. So I think it's because in some of these situations, questions were already being asked and now they're being raised again because in these cases, they tie back to the current discourse and alleged scandal.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, again, coming back to Pete, like he has said he had no awareness of it. I believe that because I think that, you know, there's a lot of this stuff that is below the minister's level, right? You have thousands of people or hundreds of people working for you. You're not learning about every procurement unless it gets, or not procurement, every like land sale or, you know, contract or bid that's out there. It gets escalated if there's a challenge or someone in the department identifies that. And so if I was a minister, I would be looking to getting internal audits going yesterday, just because you need to protect yourself, you need to protect the party brand, and you need to protect the government. And as minister, you're going to be the name that wears it, even if you are not the individual navigating it through the government process. And so, I mean, the public safety minister, a little bit different. We had also Minister Dan Williams of mental health and addictions cited in the news for being being suspicious of some happenings and also reported it and did an internal audit. It seems like there was a lot of internal audits that the government probably, if I was advising them, could have spoke a little bit sooner about some of the proactive stuff they had been doing to safeguard and ensure. But I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if that shouldn't have been, like what should and shouldn't be said. But I think that, again, we talked last episode a lot about perception. And with all of these stories and different ministers every day, it's creating like a web that's going to be really hard to break and get through to the public about it not being true. So hoping that statement of defense comes soon from the Minister of Health and anyone else that's bringing one, because I just think that they'll allow them to talk more. And all we're looking for is honesty and the truth.
Okay, so there's, in addition to sort of the other pieces of the web, so we talked about infrastructure, we talked about public safety, we talked about mental health and addictions. The actual story on AHS and procurement of private surgical facilities has continued to grow over the last week. Some industrious reporters, the Globe and Mail, Carrie Tate and Alana Smith, who originally broke this story, along with some reporting from Charles Rusnell and the Tyee, have continued to update it. And more information has now come out. The Globe and Mail printed a chart, which I think for those who hadn't really understood what the issues were, if you look at this chart, which is in the Globe and Mail and it'll be up in the podcast, the video version of the podcast, if you look at this chart, it shows the cost breakdown of surgeries across service providers. And according to this data, according to these bar graphs, the private surgical company that is at the heart of this scandal has been charging just over double what Alberta Health Services charges for hip and knee replacement, and more than double, over $11,000 for shoulders versus the AHS rate of $4,833. Those rates are also higher than the other private surgical providers. And so this, again, is raising a lot of questions. Danielle Smith, defended these contracts in her press conference last week. And now Albertans can see, she was saying it's much more economical to go to the private suppliers. Now you can look at this chart and see it's actually, in some cases, well more than double.
Yeah, I mean, I want to break it down a little bit because if you look, and sorry for our listeners, but there is no overnight cost for AHS. I would love to also see, because I think that they don't have capacity to service. One, how many of these can, like, I'm okay with a higher price if the Alberta Surgical Group is pumping out these surgeries and the like care afterwards, because as they're showing, gets better care 2 nights versus 1 night. I think there's more details to just this graph on like, what is the reoccurrence? What is other additional side effects or impacts or consequences? Like if you go home, you're more likely to be infected or something to that effect. And I think there is maybe a bigger story to like that patient's health impact on the bottom line because they have more likelihood. Now, I'm not saying it's double. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be like, what the hell, lower your price or something to that effect. But I think that this graph does say maybe what wants to be said, which is and proving that when they say it is a better impact for Albertans or it's a better investment, that's not the case. But I would also like to know, like, what can ASG put out and what kind of care do these patients get to support like their short-term recovery and long-term recovery that maybe is a problem that we're seeing in AHS or other facilities.
And I agree that this chart, there's still like lots of, you can look at this chart and just take it at face value, but I think you're right that it actually raises a lot of other questions. Like for me, on the other side of this, Alberta Surgical Group's original contract is billing 2 nights. But most of these, like this surgery does not mandate 2-night stay in the hospital. So that means that whether you stay 1 night or whether you stay 2 nights, they're going to bill the government 2 nights.
Yeah. And for the listeners, that is a cost of $1,250 a night, I would read. So, you're looking at $2,500 extra already on night care. To me, I'm
like maybe we're not using.
Yeah. And maybe we're not using, and maybe. Yeah, sorry, you can go.
Yeah, the other thing I was just going to say is I would also like to know when someone has a complication in a surgery. So they say they've gone through the private clinic, say they've gone through ASG and had a hip replacement. If there's a complication, they're going back to AHS. Like private surgical companies aren't taking on complications, they're going back into the healthcare system. So what is the additional cost? Like when AHS looks at it, it's all encompassing, right? I mean, not in this chart, but overall, it's all encompassing. When ASG looks at it, it's like, when this gets too hard, we're going to push it back onto the public system.
And maybe argument is that's why. And one of these, they most say 1 night included or as necessary. So the 2 ones that I think have been in the news more recently, which on the graph show Red Deer as letter of commitment, so not signed, and then Lethbridge was letter of commitment in negotiation. So neither are in effect. But if you do look at that from versus ASGs, like they do list as necessary, and maybe that means that there would be a reduction in that cost. Still, I want the best bang for my buck, but at the same time, if these people are going back into AHS, I would rather them have more care to avoid complications so that they don't go back in. And so I think that there's like you said, there's lots more to this story or lots more to this graph, but I do take the point that I think was trying to come across in the article, and that was that it is not cheaper. It might be more efficient, more effective, better returns, all of those things. Ultimately,
or it may not
I think those are the things that I think the government needs to look at and get facts on.
Yeah. And like this, like I said, there's lots of questions in it, but I think when you look at this was sort of the crux of Danielle Smith's argument last week. She was saying this is all AHS's fault. One of the things that she has said over and over again is why, when we asked for information about these contracts over and over and over again, I think she said for 8 months, why has nothing come up? If they had access to this information, like to me, this is enough to look into it. Like if I'm the premier and I can see that these are charging double, whether that's on face value and I have more questions, this is enough for me to care about it.
In government defense, and I don't know, these contracts go back to like these. Like this was multiple governments. It says the original contract. So they renewed a lot of these, to be clear to folks. So it's like, I don't know how much you can negotiate with the actual price at that point because there's 50 or so across the province. Like I would love to know what the impacts are should we not have, because from my understanding, if we didn't go to the private sector, AHS can't manage them. If we didn't go to quote unquote partners, and ASG obviously being the one that's been in the news more, to get these done, like what is the impact to the healthcare system?
But the argument that like this has been going on for a really long time, so we can't change it.
Oh no, what I'm saying is like that price point when you're just renewing a contract, like I
If you
think
can
it's
blow up
just
the whole
ridiculous.
healthcare system, if you can blow up the whole healthcare system and reorganize it, I'm pretty sure you can figure out the contract.
Yes. And I think, but in fairness, they do have 6 months. This is a renewal of contracts from my understanding for the 50. The new ones are looking at a different price. Absolutely in that 6 months. But I'm also saying like there's a backlog and I don't support paying more than we need to. However, to get shit done almost for lack of a better term in this scenario and get people those hip, knee, and shoulder surgeries on a short term, I would be okay with it. Not this price point. And I think, again, the criticism is that they can't use that message that it costs less. It costs more, but we're doing a fuck ton of them. And we are getting through the list would be a better message.
But let's just digress for 1 second and talk about the merits of this, because I still believe that have you invested double into the public healthcare system, we would be making progress there as well. Like Daniel Smith held up numbers saying, this is how many we've done in the private sector versus the public sector. But like dump that money into the public system. Don't pull doctors and resources out to serve private clinics.
The challenge is that there's also not beds physically to do it. And that's why I
the
think
beds
that
are empty right now. Like the beds are literally empty because there aren't specialists and surgeons to staff them because they're in the private system.
But at the same time, like you can do both if you want. We have a lot of room.
We clearly cannot.
Well, but like, so you're criticizing, then go to the AMA. Like,
no,
I don't
but
know
there's
how you
there's
criticize.
There's a finite number of doctors and specialists. And if the private system pulls those people to the private system, there's not new ones to fill the public system. We're playing with a finite number of medical resources. And so if someone says you can come work a 9 to 5 in the hip and knee clinic, or you can work in a hospital and do on-call shifts, who's not going to choose the 9 to 5, probably at a higher pay rate based on this chart? So like, yes, we are diverting resources from the public system. And of course, when you hold up the private next to the public, it's now going to look a lot better.
Yeah. I mean, I think that comes back to how healthcare works. Like we do have a true tiered healthcare system across Canada, whether people like it or not. I think we need to figure out what that looks like and that our original version of public healthcare, I mean, BC does it probably better than anyone on having a 2-tier healthcare system. So I feel like we need to figure it out because there are jurisdictions where physicians, specialists, et cetera, are required to work in the public system if they want to work in the private. And then you're getting a quote unquote, the best of both worlds. I don't know that we can't also fill the public roles because it's been paid for in the cap of beds and surgeons. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong or point me to where, that if like a physician leaves and is practicing privately, that you can't backfill them with another specialist.
With who? But with who?
Well,
like,
you have to
recruit
doctors. Them. I get that. No, but you can, and I get that you're like giving them a better offer per se.
But everywhere in the country is trying to recruit physicians.
Okay. So what do you but we're no different than any other province on this, Cheryl. So it's like, where's the solutions? You can't just like magically poof up a bunch of specialists.
But you just pointed out
physicians.
One thing, like if there's no requirement here, you don't have to work in the public system to work in the private system. Maybe that's like step one, because right now everyone's leaving. Like there's literally surgical beds empty right now in the public system because we don't have people to work in there.
We don't have the physicians. And I understand that. I think that's I don't think that's an Alberta specific problem. Again, we aren't the only ones that have private facilities where individuals don't work. I think this is like a bigger, what does our healthcare system in Canada look like? Because no one's figured out how to fix it. We've gone within the Canada Health Act. We've figured out each province differently how to still get your money and comply under the act, but have these 2-tiered healthcare systems. So like, why not just
let me just say
it?
We have not figured that out here.
No, we have not, but nowhere has. So if you can give me a demonstration, there's few jurisdictions that I think are appealing, but we don't need to get into that. But I do think there's a larger question about like, what does the healthcare system look like? If we have people leaning into a 2-tier system, how do we make it so that the public and the private is balanced? That would to me is like what our new version of public healthcare is.
Yeah, maybe. But like my point is not necessarily that it can't work. My point is that it's not working.
Okay, fair.
In Alberta, it's not working.
Okay,
so let's talk about where this goes from here, because there's been like a lot of new.
There's so much.
And maybe, like, truthfully, we probably have no idea about where this goes from here because the new information is coming out every day. By the time we post this podcast, if it's anything like last week, there'll be something before it even publishes.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of new information. So let's talk about next steps.
Yeah. So yeah, there's been pretty steady drumbeat over this. Like I said, it feels like it's like this slow drip. And I don't know if all these journalists are like coordinating, probably are to not step on their own toes, but it's like every 2 days almost we're getting different stories. And like, I know that there's things you want to get down to. All I think we can hope for on next steps is like the truth. And as ugly or good or whatever it is comes out. So like, again, the next major steps we're looking for is statement of defense. We also are going to throw budget as a distraction, I guess, into it. Look for all of the progress on this internal audit or this internal investigation. Like I think that their narrative for them personally, the minister and the premier, was strong last week because they said they did no wrongdoings. Now that doesn't clear the government. It doesn't clear AHS procurement. It doesn't clear people at maybe executive and or director level, like, or individuals that are in the statement of claim that worked in the premier's office. Like that, I think, is the stuff that's going to change the narrative, because I don't think that, and I've talked about everyone wants a villain. I don't think that it's coming out that Adriana LaGrange and Danielle Smith are the villains. And I think that's where we're going to see a media shift, because now they've said no wrongdoings. And like, where do you go from there? Yeah. I think you look for the weaknesses within the rest of the statement of claim and go after that.
And I completely agree. Like, a lot of this has been really one-sided since Athena Mentzelopoulos filed her statement of claim. She's got her statement out there. She's got a very, very detailed statement of claim. And because it's public and because it's been filed in the courts, media has a lot to go on. Yeah. And so
it's actually, so from a few lawyer friends, it's very different. Like a lot of times names aren't mentioned. Like it is, I think, a little bit more scathing, if you will, than what I understand most statement of claims to be, where you might say allude to positions, but she's naming names and being very, very clear on like what was said, etc. And so I think it's also like pretty unique, her statement of claim. Take it that for what you want, but it was very thorough, we'll call it.
Yeah. And it has really dominated, because it's the only thing out there. It has really dominated the narrative and the public coverage. But as soon as the government files its statement of defense, and as we know from Danielle Smith's press conference last week, there's likely to be multiple statements of defense. So the former Chief of Staff, Marshall Smith, will likely file his own. I won't be surprised if Andre Tremblay, the bureaucrat that's been the head of AHS and the Deputy Minister to Health, files his own. We expect Adriana LaGrange, who's named in the statement of claim, to file hers.
And she's the one on the suit, right? Like through the government, she would be the individual that's been named as the highest to the crown.
Yeah. So all of those people, if they all file statements of defense, like, first of all, it's going to be a media frenzy. But second, it also obviously changes sort of the evolution of this story, and everything that is printed from now on and everything is talked about will have to sort of cite both sides of it.
Yeah, this has been tricky. I'll also say, though, because like we need to be very careful about like what we say, because again, we want it to be really clear to our listeners, and like every outlet I've been on is like reading disclaimers, etc., because these are all allegations. And like you said, there's only one side of allegations out, with the other side only giving us little tidbits, such as the press conference last week. So I'm actually excited, from like having more, usually most of the time, verbal diarrhea, like to have like clear thing where I can compare and contrast both sides, because it's a hard thing to understand as is, and it's going to be really, I think, challenging for us as citizens to understand, because now it's a he said, she said. However, I think that's going to get us all closer to the truth, but I think there's going to be a lot of contrast from the statement of defense versus the statement of claim, because it was quite it was just very, very detailed and very personalized.
Yeah. And for anyone who's listening to this podcast being like, why are they being so cagey and vague? It's because we don't want to get sued. So trying to be careful around this topic, because as we've said, this is a statement of claim. None of these allegations have been proven. Nothing has been tested in court. The government has yet to file their statement of defense. So a lot of this is just what's in the public discourse, and not jumping to conclusions about things that haven't been proven. A couple of big questions for me that, as I watch all of this, I still have one big question. And I want to know who owns the extra 12%, the 12% of Alberta Surgical Group that has not been accounted for. The Globe did a lot of digging about who the ownership of this group is, and they came up with everybody else who owns this group, but 12% is undisclosed. And first of all, that's strange in itself. Like, I want to know who owns that 12%.
Well, that's not allowed. There has to be record
That's
somewhere.
the other point.
Like, the procurement process requires that you know all owners.
The procurement process, it is wild to me that Alberta Surgical Group could have ever got a contract without disclosing who owns the company. And so if we're doing an audit into AHS procurement, like, this is a big red flag for me. Why did they get the contract without disclosing, and who owns the 12%? So, I mean, throughout this process,
like, who owns the
who owns the 12%?
12%, or just like a big and you have it like the jersey with the 12 on the back.
Yeah,
and making
like,
this
but this is like, maybe it's completely normal. Maybe there's a really good reason it hasn't been disclosed, and then we can all, rest easier. But this has continued to sort of like sit in the back of my mind as this story has grown bigger and bigger. And now it's pretty much the only thing I care about. Like, I just want to know who owns the other 12%. I think it would answer a lot of other questions.
Well, I think that it's just like, it's, to me, the quote unquote sketchiest part of any of it, right? Like, again, I support, let's outsource if it's in the best interest of Albertans. I would hope it's for a great value of cost, but I want the ROI to be high. I'm not opposed to partnering with Alberta Surgical Group in any way, but it's just like, as you're going through this process, and which has been criticized, is the mannerism in which these things were signed off on through the procurement area of AHS. And so, yeah, this should live somewhere. Otherwise, that is on its own not properly how the process should go. And again, I think that's where one of these moments, it's the sketchy sounding one right now that you can't, in investigative journalism, can't find that answer out.
Because it's not in the listing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that is really, I think, sticking with me through this whole process is I don't understand how the Premier couldn't have known about any of this. Like, if I'm not even saying any of this if it's true, like, I don't know how she couldn't have even known about the allegations being raised. Like, the CEO of Alberta Health Services is about to go to the AG to deliver the initial findings of an investigation that she's done. And 2 days before that, the health minister wants her gone. And the Premier is just like, without any information, she's just like, sure, go ahead.
I suspect that there was conversations, whether through Premier's office and a senior official being the conduit or liaison, which is pretty typical. And I think that it proves that there was a lot of conversations with her former chief of staff, with the department and ministry, et cetera. And she said that in the news, that the social files he kind of oversaw. So did she maybe put too much trust there? Perhaps. I do think that she said wrongdoings. And I know we've talked about this in previous podcasts. Like, if your minister of health comes to you and is like, the reforms we want are not happening, I'm having lots of challenges, I'm sure over time with the CEO, not fulfilling the mandate, et cetera. I'm hitting a bunch of walls. I mean, we've talked about it. Athana went in with nobody else that was in change management, all people that probably are working against reforms because it would make their lives a lot different. And also they have to point at themselves about where their failures in the system were. Like, that's a hard thing for people to navigate. But if you have your minister saying, I'm going to fire this person because of this, and that was probably a reoccurring conversation, whether it was with the Premier directly or her office, and the Premier then gets told that they're doing it, and she says, like, I have that this is justified, I don't think that's a wrongdoing. So I think what she's saying in her comment, it's like, this was valid. Someone did not fulfill their contract. Again, right now, we only have one side. And from someone that's like mad that they got fired or removed or whatever, they're now asking for a bunch of compensation. So obviously they're biased. Obviously they're positioning themselves in the best light, whether it's true or not. Again, I only know Athana at surface value. I don't know her personally enough to understand, but I do understand that she's a very honest and ethical person. And I hope that that's the statement of claims. I think that's all we can hope from anyone, but that we only have that one side right now. And again, if I was the Premier and I disagree, if I agreed with someone firing someone for just reason, then that is not wrongdoing in your eyes.
Okay, but so one, it's not like she came up with these allegations after she was fired. She was already looking into this stuff. She was about to go meet with the AG about this stuff. So it's not like she just like imagined them after she got fired.
Yep.
So I think that's worth noting.
Totally.
And then the second thing is, let's just play out what you just said. And the Premier knows nothing. The health minister comes to her and says, listen, we've been trying to push through these reforms. There's a lot of resistance. We're not getting cooperation from the head of Alberta Health. I think it's time to let her and the entire board go. And the Premier's like, you know what? These are really important to me. I agree with you. You go ahead and fire them all. And then all of this comes out and the premier finds out, if I'm the premier and I find out that actually there was an investigation going on internally because there was issues with procurement, and that CEO was about to go to the AG and that they fired her the 2 days before. Like, if I'm the premier, not only have you completely eroded my trust if you're the health minister, but I would be pissed.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what's happening in Closer.
We don't.
She said she continues to be confident in LaGrange. I suspect she was briefed, again, whether it was her office or her or through a proxy that met with the minister from her office on those updates. I'm sure she knew if there was frustrations between the health minister and the CEO of AHS that the premier was briefed on that, but like no actions. That maybe, again, that I would assume that the health minister went and said, like, we've been asking for these allegations. I keep pushing. This is, again, a proof point of like, I don't think the CEO is trying to work with us, et cetera. But that still doesn't put the premier in a position to say that she was a part of it versus, again, leaving her minister of health. And so I would get, like, you would feel a little bit, whether it's from the health minister or your team, a little bit like, shit, why wasn't this built into it? Or why didn't we think about this timing or the implications or whatever? But there is also like, she's off fighting Trump with tariffs. And I don't know that she was maybe
I don't think that's a good excuse.
No, I think that, but like, again, you have to instill power in your ministers. But again, I'm saying she's
but you also,
and she's got a lot of shit going on.
For sure.
I think I would have probably, and I guess this comes back to changing the narrative, like, and now it's this person and this ministry and that. Like, now I think they have to shift to humility of like, we are stepping back. The truth is the most important. And we want Albertans to continue to trust us and continue to see that we're being transparent through this. And that's what they have to default to. It's totally reactionary as opposed to proactive now, which is always unfortunate, as you know, when you're in issues management. But I think they need to tone it down. Last week, appropriate to be aggressive to get their message out that they were not, that those allegations are false. Now I think they need to be like, well, fuck. Like, we've got to do some digging in our own house.
I can totally buy, like, listen, I was really busy. There was a lot going on. I completely have trust in my cabinet and I want them to be able to operate with their own authority. But like, every premier knows that in the end, you wear it. Like, you are accountable for this.
And trust
if
in your
any
staff,
of these
right?
allegations are proven, if any of it's proven, it's Premier Smith that will ultimately wear it. And so if she, signed off on it without being briefed, did she let someone else lead it? If she didn't ask the right questions, she's going to wear that. Like, she doesn't, she's not absolved of responsibility here, even if she wasn't involved in any wrongdoing.
And this is where, and correct me if I'm wrong from the NDP world, but I think we've seen this across politics. Like, if there is anyone that you can point to for being the root cause or the toxicity, whether it's in your administration, in your office, in AHS, in the departments, whatever, like, all I want to know is the truth. And if there's individuals that were acting not in the best interest of the government, the premier needs to be the one to cut off their heads and put it on a platter.
Yeah.
I think that saves the grace of what you're talking about that she needs to now manage, because it is, quote, like, it's Premier Smith's government. No one said it's Premier Smith, but it is still, she's at the top. And if you're at the top, you're the first to get cut by the weed whacker.
What an analogy.
Thank you. Someone told me that when I got into politics. They were like, don't be the huge flower that's up, but don't be the shortest grass. Be the one that avoids the weed whacker, but has potential. I was like,
words to live by.
I know. Anecdotes by Erika Barutis. Is there anything else that you're still looking at? I know we're going to be talking about budget tomorrow anyway, but anything else that you're focused on for watching this? I am just like, I just want it to go away. Like, I just want it to stop, and not in the way of,
it's
like,
not going to.
No, I know, but I'm saying, like, it's just, you see it and it like hurts my heart. Like,
of course,
Jason Kenney and I, like, he hates when I say this, but like, that's our child, right? The UCP as founding president and as the founding leader. And so it's tough for me to see the government ever have to navigate this. I've lived it before. It's not fun. And for me personally, it's just like, I want it to not hurt the brand and not hurt the government and not hurt the potential of, like, all the things that this government wants to accomplish, and ultimately not hurt the leader, because that's what you're supposed to do as a party too. And I hope she steps up and leads and finds who the true villains are.
Well, I won't say that I hope that for you as well, because, in 2028, I would love to see a change in government.
I was just going to say the opposition, like the first few days of session, like, man, you're like usually like, yeah, let's present this budget. Let's go back. It's all nice. And it's like, I'm sure all of the UCP is just dreading question period. And the NDP is like, who gets to ask all these questions? And then she's probably dying that he's not in the House to be able to.
Yeah. When are they going to call
hard.
that? We need that by-election to happen.
Yeah, let's just
Do you
throw
think
that
they have
into
some
the mix.
bandwidth to do that right now?
Yeah, probably. Let's just throw a by-election. I mean, it's going to be hard for whatever candidate the UCP has in there.
I'm sure you'll find a martyr.
It'll be me. Just kidding.
That would be great. That would be really great.
My whole campaign would just be like, I live closer to it than you do. A couple neighborhoods, not a whole city. Anyways, well, we have double takes this week, and there's no shortage of topics. So we will continue to talk about budget, which is tomorrow, and give some hot takes. And we might do some clips on our social media about because we just have to stay up to date on what's happening and giving you guys our opinions.
So this one's dropping this week. And then we have a budget special coming out on February 28th, the day after the Alberta budget. And that works out great because next week we're going to take the week off. Erika finally gets to go on a long delayed honeymoon, which is actually celebrating your 5th anniversary.
It is. This is what happens when you get married February 2020, right before a pandemic. You saved a lot of money on your wedding and your honeymoon, but now we're going to live it up and celebrate and go off to on an adventure. So yeah, that's it for today. New episodes drop every Thursday at 5 a.m. So set those alarms. And don't forget to follow us on X, Instagram, and TikTok.
And don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erika Barudis. Follow on Instagram @TheDiscoursePod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.